Hello and welcome to Pocket Jazz Presents. I'm your host, Robert Carmack, here with my special guest host, Mr. Val Omar, and we have a show in store for you. Today's theme is centered around Black historical entertainers that are eclectic. And who more eclectic than the great Donny Hathaway himself and Mr. Sam Cooke? But first, I want to introduce you to a person who's been who knew, went to school with, produced, and played with Mr. Donny Hathaway. Our special guest today is going to be none other than Mr. Ric Powell. But first, let's get into a word from one of our newest sponsors, Black History 365. And Val, why don't you explain to us who Black History 365 is and how our audience can participate?
Black History 365 is a concept that's been around a while, ever since the first day that was called Black History Day. And that, for whatever reason, the people who created that day started it in February. Then it extended to a week. And now we got a full month, man, 28, maybe 29 days every leap year. So, I always took issue with that for some reason, even since I was a teenager. And what I decided to do, since I have the Facebook account, I decided to extend Black history to 365 days a year. And the reason is because we didn't just make history in the month of February, and we made history throughout the year and all around the year. And just to give you a little bit of some of the aesthetics about the page and how I listed it, I did not just use the word Black. I used Black in quotations, so it's Black in quotations, history 365. And the reason I did that is because I always looked at the word Black as it relates to our culture as meaning absent, omitted, crossed out. You know, when we look at those old movies and we used to see the old guys who came in and they were asked to sign their name, they said, "Well, I can't write. I'm going to sign my name." And then they said, "Well, sir, just put the X right there." And she's, "Oh, okay. And how do you make an X?" so they helped him make the X, and that X stood for his signature because he did not know how to write his name. So that is the reason I made the word Black in quotes, because a lot of our history has been lost, omitted, scratched out. And for that reason, I call it Black in quotes history 365. To put it
well,
simply.
thank you. We're going to get into a little bit more about that at the end of the program on how you can submit or apply or join this particular group, and how you can be supportive of this new programming being brought to you by Pocket Jazz Presents. Now for our show. Ladies and gentlemen, without any further ado, I'd like to bring out first of all, this gentleman is a musician. He's a drummer, percussionist, including vibes. He's also a major songwriter, publisher, and he's also a certified scuba diver instructor. And we're going to talk a little bit about that a little later too. But first, the music thing and he produced the very first Donny Hathaway album, Everything's Everything. How cool is that gotta be? So without any further ado, I'd like to bring on Mr. Ric Powell. Ladies and gentlemen, say hello to Mr. Ric Powell. Ric, how you doing today?
I'm well, thank you. And thank you for having me, Carl. Robert. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I said I'm well. Thank you for allowing me to be your guest.
Well, thank you. It's an honor to actually have you here today, Ric, because I don't know. I think we and I were friends on Facebook for a long time, and I just never took the time, I guess, to see which Ric Powell I was friends with. Since that name sounds so familiar, but at the same time, it didn't dawn on me that he's the guy. Now, I know what it was like here in Los Angeles, seeing as how when that record hit, it must have been about, I don't know, some part of 1970 when it was released, or I know you guys taped it starting in 69. Why don't you tell us a little bit about how did you even land? How did you even come up with, and how did you even meet Donny Hathaway? Could you share that with us a little bit about how you met him, and how did you even wind up being the producer for that such monumental album?
Well, I've been very blessed to the point that my music career started at a very young age. In fact, as a kid, I was on the Ted Mack Amateur Hour, and I had my little child band, a little percussion band, and here living in New York. So that's where that started. A lot of my friends were people who went to music and art high school and performing arts high school and stuff like that, like Jimmy Castor and stuff. Like, we worked together. Before there was a Jimmy Castor the Bunch, he played with my band. It was Ric Powell Band. So I started as a teenager, and when I graduated out of high school, I went into the Navy. And when I went into the Navy, originally I went into the Navy as a musician, but they said I was left-handed or something like that, and that was a problem with the marching band drums or something. I don't know. So anyway, so I ended up being a radio man. Then I got into the UDT SEAL team, underwater demolition team, SEAL team. Okay, and that's how I learned to scuba dive in the Navy in 1961 in Key West, Florida, as a underwater demolition team. Well, during the time that I was in the Navy, I still played music. In fact, on different ships, I'd go to different places and always carried my bongos with me or something like that, or we pull into a port and I'd find out where there was some live music and go and ask to sit in. So it was a matter of keeping that going. So when I finally was discharged from active duty with the Navy, I moved to Washington. My father was a doctor in Washington, practicing in Washington, D.C. So I went to Washington and I entered into Howard University. Okay. So while I was in Howard University, I had an opportunity to play with a few people like Harold Wheeler. Now, I don't know if you remember Harold Wheeler, but he was the band director for Dancing with the Stars. When Dancing with the Stars TV first came about, Harold Wheeler was the music director for Dancing with the Stars. I don't know what happened with that, but they discontinued, his service. But anyway, we worked around the Washington, D.C. area, and I was offered a job at one of the local nightclubs in the Washington area. I asked Harold Wheeler, who's a piano player, and he's from St. Louis too, whether or not he was interested in playing. He said he had something else going and he couldn't do it, but he wanted to introduce me to another student who was at Howard that he thought was a great musician, and Donny Hathaway. So he introduced me to Donny Hathaway. And Donny Hathaway at the time, he had just been playing with the churches. He never had played any as he called the secular music, anything like that. So I met Donny and I told him that I wanted him to, without even hearing him play, I wanted him to come make this audition with me. So he hesitated because he said that, hey, we speak about different people, Sam Cooke, Nat Cole, and stuff like that, who had left the church and went into secular music and got into a lot of problems. In fact, they died of different situations. So, he was always told that if he was to leave the church, that would be a problem. In fact, Mavis Staples told me that same thing later on too. But anyway, so I said, well, listen, Donny, just make the audition with me, all right? And then we could talk about it later. So he agreed to do that. Donny knew about 3 songs, okay? He knew Maria from the West Side Story. He knew Georgia on My Mind, Ray Charles style, and he knew Misty, okay? And so he played those songs. First he played, he played the in crowd. So the owner said, well, listen, man, y'all gonna have to have a vocalist, you know? So I said, well, do you have a budget for us to have somebody else, a vocalist? So he says, no, you're gonna have to work that out. So I said, okay, Donny. Donny had this preacher voice. I said, man, sing Misty or something. And he sang Misty in Georgia. And the club owner say, listen, when can y'all start? You know, I mean, he was so impressed with Donny's performance, playing the piano and singing, that he said, hey, how soon can y'all start?